Welcome, everyone. We're back for another exciting interview, and this time it's with my teacher of 20, 30 years. It just goes on and on. I've done Kaballah, Tarot, Esoteric Astrology, Anatomy, Psychology, and then Nature of the Soul, of course. And she's taught thousands of students. So welcome, Georgia.
Nice to be here.
And I'm going to give a little bit of her bio. Let's see. So she's for over 50 years of experience in the field of esoteric studies, receiving formal training in Eastern and Western disciplines, methods, traditions. She specializes in the synthesis of the Western mystery tradition. She has addressed private groups in both the United States and in Britain, currently teaching in-depth classes to students around the world via an online audio visual medium, and has taught consistently for the last 40 years. Wow. And I know you do every week, 3 or 4 classes. Her classes cover a range of esoteric traditions and meditation techniques, including the Ageless Wisdom, the Kaballah, Masonry, and their Etheric quest for the Grail. In addition to teaching, she's currently working on several books, including a book on internal disciplines and esoteric physiology for physicians, and completed treatise on the working dynamics of esoteric groups. Well, that sounds like a lot of work.
It's out of trouble.
So what we're going to do today, because she's just like a master at esoteric anatomy, and so that's why I really wanted to invite her. This is going to be a 2-part series. This is the first part, and then eventually we'll get to the second part. And so, Georgia, what would you like to say?
Well, first and foremost, most people are aware that there's a lot of information out in the metaphysical marketplace about the subtle body and chakras. Unfortunately, there's also a ton of misinformation, particularly about the chakras. So what I thought I'd do in these 2 sessions is, in the first one, talk about the different layers of the subtle body. And in the second one, talk about the organs of that body, which are the energy centers we know as chakras.
Great.
So what we'll do today is take a look at this multi-layered form which we are.
Okay, so let's do it.
Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a chart and let everybody take a good look at it, because I'm going to then remove the chart and we'll talk about the different layers. So let me put up the chart here. Let me share screen. There we go. All right, if you can see, there's different layers here, and we'll talk about them from the densest level upward. First and foremost, we have down here physical radiation. You can see my little mouse. This would be the radiation that's given off by the physical body itself, and we will talk about that. Then we'll talk about the physical etheric. In many metaphysical systems, just the term etheric is applied, but actually the proper term is physical etheric. This is that energy body that conforms to the physical body and underlies the physical nerves. We'll talk about that. The next one is this ovoid egg-shaped sphere called the astral or emotional body. This would be the body of your feeling nature. And then finally, this ovoid here, this is listed as the mental body or the mental sphere. And all of this is included in what's known as the etheric envelope or the true etheric light body. And there's a lot of confusion between this and the physical etheric. So I thought we'd sort that out today. So again, what we're going to do is not say too much about the physical body, but we'll go from physical to physical etheric to the astral or emotional body to the mental body, and finally the etheric envelope. Okay?
Okay, and really, I mean, it just shows like we're really egg-shaped people.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about it, that the sphere is really the shape of the universe. Planets and their orbits are spherical.
Mm-hmm.
Atoms are spherical. And so are we. Again, made in the greater image.
Right. Okay.
Okay, let me stop the share here. All right. So let's just talk about these different layers. First of all, we have the physical dense body, called in metaphysical parlance, the physical elemental. Of course, a lot is known by science about the physical body. We're understanding more all the time. There's wonderful research being done by people like the Heart Math group on the magnetic fields that come off the physical heart, and also the quality that comes off of a physical body. We know, for instance, that the muscles of a bodybuilder put out a lot more energy than the muscles of, let's say, you or I. So the physical body itself, which includes the physical brain, which is the gray matter in the skull, it's part of the physical body. It also puts out its own magnetic field. And of course, in esoteric tradition, we are anchored to our physical dense body via two threads. The life thread anchored in the heart at the sinoatrial node, the SA node, which is the pulse point that governs the pulse and the rhythm of the heart. And that thread is connected with the beginning of fetal heartbeat. But the consciousness thread, which is anchored in the head near the region of the pineal gland, overshadows until about age 2. And then it begins to connect, and the individual begins to recapitulate all the growth they have made on the path in past incarnations. And that can last all the way through childhood, so that really they're not starting their new incarnational experience until maturity, which is different for different people depending on how far along you are on the path. It can be around 21 or 28, depending on where you are. So a lot is known about the physical body and the energy that the physical body and the physical muscles puts out. Mm-hmm. This will also include all those chemical components. Whatever emotions we're feeling comes out in our tears, for instance. It's interesting that studies have been done where it's been shown that the chemical component of tears when you're crying because you're sad is completely different than the normal tears because you've got a speck of dust in your eye.
That's why you're supposed to take a taste of them.
Well, you think of all the old fairy lore about, catching someone's tears and using them in magical potions. Mm-hmm. There's might be something to that. So anyway, so there's not a lot to say about the physical body. We could think about, the phenomena that everybody experiences in the hot summer when you look out across the horizon onto the road and you see those waves of heat coming off the physical pavement. Mm-hmm. There is a physical radiation from the physical body. From the muscles themselves, as we were just talking about, but also the magnetic field of certain major physical centers, like the heart and like the brain. So we don't need to spend too much time on the physical body. Science knows a lot about that.
Right.
The next thing is more interesting because this is the area that science is nosing into. This is the physical etheric body, called just the etheric network or the vital body in a lot of metaphysical traditions. Mm-hmm. This particular body is an energy body that is sustained by the energy body of the planet itself. The modern words for this would be the force, Luke. This is that network of energy that connects everything to everything else. It's like those Russian nesting dolls. There's a life within a greater life within a greater life, or those wonderful ivory balls that you see carved in the East, where you have a sphere within a sphere within a sphere. Each sphere moves independently, and yet it's contained within the larger sphere. So each of us have our own etheric network, our own etheric vital body. And yet it's part of the vital body of humanity, which is part of the vital body of the planet itself.
Wow, it's so interesting, the interconnectedness.
Absolutely. And the whole key to the health of this system is free circulation. You know, you think of a stream that's flowing and it's healthy, but if parts of it get siphoned off to the side and form little stagnant pools, this is where disease sets in. And so health can be associated with free circulation of this vitality. This is the body that processes what the Hindus call prana, which is a kind of energy that we get from sunlight. It's interesting that when in hospitals people are slowly dying of a disease process or old age, they're much more likely to slip away gently in the wee small hours of the morning when the prana content of the atmosphere is very low. Prana, again, is this vitality that we get from sunlight. And it sustains the life of the planet as well as the life of every individual unit within the planet's life and affairs, which includes us. This physical etheric network is underlying the physical nerves. In Hindu tradition, this system is called the nadis or nadis system, Nadis. And these are nerves of light that underlie our physical nerves. And the physical etheric body not only underlies the physical body, but it sustains it. It's one notch up from physical dense. Now, this is really interesting because science is nosing into this area. The very fact that today we can see ultraviolet light as purple light indicates that our senses are extending into this dimension. You know, the old idea of extrasensory perception really is a false one. It should be extended sensory perception. If we think of our sight and our hearing, for instance, as a particular octave on a piano, we're extending into the ultraviolet end and into the infrared end. Science knows that, for instance, in ancient humanity, there was a time when we couldn't see all the colors that we can see today. This is why ancient paintings on statues was in, you know, pretty primitive, bold colors, primary colors. The same thing is true with our hearing. We couldn't hear all the sounds that we can hear today. So our senses are a work in progress. They're becoming more subtle, more sensitive. And humanity is at a place in its development where it's becoming more sensitive to this next layer of matter, the physical etheric spectrum. The idea of the force or the matrix, or the idea of the new healing modalities using light and sound and color. All of this is moving into this physical etheric realm. The very acupuncture system itself is part of this physical etheric realm. The physical...
It just is so interesting when you look at the colors. I always think like with the Chinese for water, it was always blue and black. And then eventually the blue, they separated, you know, you could just almost trace it, how the sight changed.
Well, science knows that the first color that we could see was red, which is associated with life. And so that combination of black and white, which we could always see, And then red is a very powerful color combination, which is why you see it a lot on nationalistic flags and advertising, because that particular combination makes more of a impact on the subconscious than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll have to look at what the color of everyone's flags are.
You know, you look at advertising, particularly around Christmas, and all the car advertisements are all black and white or black and silver and red.
Right, exactly. Oh, it's really amazing. Okay.
So the physical etheric body is this wonderful area that science, again, is just nosing into. When we talk about the effect of electromagnetic fields and this is not just the etheric network of humanity. There are, of course, areas of science out on the fringe that are getting into things like ley lines and the etheric vital body of the earth itself. You know, there's a whole science growing in understanding that ancient peoples knew how to manipulate the etheric currents of the earth. And just as we have acupuncture meridians, so does the earth itself. It has what's called ley lines, or the dragon currents, as they're called in other places. And the standing stones were used as acupuncture needles to manipulate the currents of the earth. In fact, studies have been done by dowsers and those with scientific equipment that show that for 2 weeks out of the month, there is an energy within the atmosphere that moves down the stones in bands of 7 into the earth itself. And then for another 2 weeks, the current reverses and the energy moves from the earth back up the stone into the atmosphere. And this is where the British term a fortnight comes from, which is a 2-week period, which is an odd period unless you understand that this is the breath of the earth. And our instrument, our bodies, are tuned into this particular rhythm, not just the female body, but from the time that the brain manufactures the cerebrospinal fluid, that spinal fluid moves from the brain down the spinal cord to the end of the spinal column, and then back up to be reabsorbed within the arachnid spaces within the head. The cerebrospinal fluid is actually manufactured in the big spaces on either hemisphere called ventricles. And that cerebrospinal fluid pools into the middle or third ventricle, where the pineal gland lives and the pituitary gland lives, and then it moves down to the back old part of the brain, down the spinal column, bathing the spinal cord, and then for the last 2 weeks, it moves back up and is reabsorbed. So our bodies themselves are tuned to the breath of the earth.
That reminds me, within Chinese astrology, they divide it into 24 segments rather than 12. So it's 2 each month. So they're actually, tracing that.
Go ahead.
I remember like one time way back when you were talking about the different places in the brain and how in Grey's Anatomy, they were so descriptive about what you're talking about now, where it would water the tree of life and all of that, and how they're changing the names of all of these.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
same concept,
Well, remember that the early anatomists were metaphysicians. We're looking at Agrippa and Paracelsus and some of those early pioneers that named parts of the brain. They understood the esoteric implications for certain areas and activities. And of course, all those old Latin names are now being done away with to make it easier for modern medical students. But we're losing a lot of very interesting meanings in that process.
Exactly. I always thought when you go back and look, it's just so much more meaningful. Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, in some of the more advanced types of meditation, that affect the chakras directly. The crown chakra, and we'll talk about this next time, but the crown chakra has its physical touchdown point. The pineal gland is its physical touchdown point. The endocrine glands are the physical touchdown points for the chakras. And the ajna center in front of the forehead has the pituitary gland as its physical touchdown point. And this forms a particular polarity within the head, a masculine and feminine polarity, which is known in alchemy as the sun and the moon, or the red and the white. And when the crown chakra and the ajna center are brought to a certain place of development, their magnetic fields overlap within the center of the head, activating these glands in a new way. And so when the cerebrospinal fluid each month is produced and it pools in the middle ventricle or space within the brain, those glands release new hormones into that magical alchemical soup, so that when it moves to the back part of the brain, it brings a different quality to our past, the old part of the brain, changing our past. And then as it moves down the spinal cord back up, it affects all the other chakras that funnel into it. And we can talk about that more next time.
Perfect.
You know, Blavatsky said there are always 7 levels of truth, and one of them will always be anatomical. If we really understood the functioning of our bodies, we would understand the processes on more subtle levels, because the processes are the same depending on which layer or level of matter you're operating in. So this physical etheric body is really the forefront today of where we're going. Certain metaphysical traditions, like the Alice Bailey material, for instance, says that as we move into this next 2,500-year period, humanity will not only become telepathic, but more and more people will be born with etheric vision. This is not clairvoyance. This is absolutely physical etheric vision through the physical eyes as they become more sensitive. And more people will begin to see these energy lines within the earth underlying our physical bodies and connecting us all, which will radically change behavior. Think about that.
I hope it's in our lifetime. I mean, this lifetime.
Yeah. I mean, we're already seeing science nosing into this area. I mean, 50 years ago, people weren't talking about healing with, magnets or light or sound or, all of the modalities that we're moving into today. And certainly acupuncture was known in the East, but it wasn't well known in the West.
Right.
60 years ago.
Yeah, it's amazing how I've had several people on there, the sound healing with tuning forks and all of this, or finding your missing note. It's really, and very sophisticated research. Yeah.
And another application of understanding the physical etheric network is, of course, the science of Feng Shui.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is,
we're talking about flow and all of that. It's the basis.
It has to do with manipulating the bigger currents. The etheric body is, again, fascinating because it's the closest to our idea of physical reality. It is becoming part of our physical reality. I mean, the whole internet virtual world is moving into that etheric space, not limited to physicality. So it's part of our culture at every possible level.
Right. Wow.
Also, there's another application of it, and that has to do with our relationship to the other kingdoms in nature. Animal communication, those that commune with plants, things like the Findhorn experiment back in the 60s. All of this is getting into a bigger layer of life that we live in all the time, but we're now just becoming aware of it within our physical brains.
That's been my experience with the labyrinth, the sharp labyrinth I've been walking, I've like, the Deva welcomed me, and it was like so interesting and going through what her functions were. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've always thought that a lot of those ancient mazes were brain patterns.
Mm-hmm. They've proven that now.
Yeah, because when you walk them, the magnetic field around your body takes different angles to the magnetic field of the earth. And in the ancient Gothic churches, as you walk the maze, you were faced with this stained glass window and what it meant, or this particular carving and what that meant. And it was like a journey that affected your subconscious as you walked it, not just because of the internal work, but because of what was presented at different angles as your body turned to walk the maze.
What's amazing about the Chart labyrinth at Chart is the big rose window. When it's brought down, it's exactly the same size. It overlays the labyrinth.
Yeah, I haven't walked the Chart maze, but I've several times done the huge maze on Glastonbury Tor.
Oh, okay.
England, which is a three-dimensional maze. It's not only the maze itself, but it's up the mountain as well.
Well, that's what the David told me, that all mazes are three-dimensional. So as you're walking them, to really picture that you're going up, you're making an etheric temple, like
right.
Tower, power tower. Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So again, the physical etheric underlies the physical nerves. It's in the same shape as the physical body, extending 3 to 6 inches outside of the physical body. So it's a little bigger. Mm-hmm. And again, this is the area that we are moving into in terms of science, in terms of our technology, in terms of the extension of our senses.
Mm-hmm. Great.
The next level up is an ovoid or egg-shaped body. Now, this one is talked about a lot in metaphysical circles. This is the astral body or the emotional body. And it's exactly what the name implies. It is the content of our emotional nature. Its signature is color. When people talk about seeing color in auras, they're talking about an astral interpretation. It might be coming from a higher place, but when it gets to the astral body, it takes on color as well as astral matter itself. And this is important to understand. You could have a patient, let's say, lying in the hospital, and you could have 3 different psychics come into the hospital and look at this patient. And they might see 3 completely different things, and they might all be right. Because one might be tuning in to the physical etheric network, which shows disease before it manifests in the physical body as a darkness or a heaviness. Another psychic might be seeing the astral body, this ovoid body of color, which again, disease will show up as a distortion of color in that particular area. Another might be seeing the lowest levels of the mind, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And so they could all be right. And this is why skilled metaphysicians need to move into the sciences to help sort all of this out, because it's not all the same thing.
This is a big conundrum in the dowsing world, because you can have several dowsers and they're looking at different levels.
Yeah. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong. They both may be completely right. It's just at what layer or level are you observing this phenomena?
Right.
So the astral body, this ovoid body, is very malleable. On the chart that I showed you, it extends out, some feet or yards, but it can be expanded greatly. In fact, it's said that great actors, stage actors, unconsciously expand their astral body to include everyone in the audience. And that gives them the rapport with that audience. And then when they step off stage and their astral body sort of collapses back, they feel it as a deflation. And so many actors get kind of hooked on being on stage all the time to have that expansion because they get used to that. But the astral body is a body of color. The best way to think about it is think about a soap bubble. You know, when you used big soap bubbles as a kid and you saw the surface of it with those swirling colors, very delicate, and the slightest little wind would make those colors swirl faster.
That's a good analogy, yeah.
Yeah, the same thing is true with our astral body. We have in-house emotions that we generate ourselves and that, you know, are our pet emotions, like, you know, a pattern of depression or a pattern of wonder or whatever it happens to be. But our astral bodies are also recipient of the impact of the astral circulation of humanity. This is why we can pick up on each other's vibes or the vibes of a place. You can go into a place and know pretty quickly if it's a happy place or a place that doesn't feel right or feels really icky. The example I always give is, for instance, some of the concentration camps from World War II have been made into beautiful memorial gardens, but the feel of it is still awful, you know, because it's relatively new.
Right.
And so it doesn't mean that ghosts are there. It means that the matter of that place has absorbed the vibrations, particularly emotional vibrations of what has been done there. And it's sort of like the etheric and astral atmosphere of the place has been impressed with that particular frequency. With one exception, almost all psychic abilities have their roots within the astral body. The one exception is telekinesis, or the ability to move physical objects. That has its roots in the physical etheric network. But all the other psychic abilities have their roots within the astral body. And there are many, many frequencies within the astral body. I mean, you think of the range of the grossest, most base human emotion to the most sublime, wondrous, angelical feelings. And everything in between makes up the human astral environment. Again, we are recipient of the impact, the astral impact of anything that's moving through the network. And if we have a line of least resistance or a similar vibration within our instrument, we can be impacted by that and pick up on that and think it's our own, not realizing that it's something that's moving through humanity. And because
it's so big during the pandemic time.
Absolutely. And because we're not trained to think in terms of group, we immediately think of it as ours. The example I always like to give in my classes is, let's imagine you're in an office building and you're sitting at your desk and you're doing your work. And over on the other side of the room, there's another worker that's doing the same thing, sitting at his desk, doing his work. But he's having a real hard time emotionally. Maybe he had a fight with his wife, or there's illness in the family, or there's some sort of upset, and it's grinding on him. And he's not showing any outward signs, you know, he's not tearing his hair out or breaking pencils or anything like that. But this vibration is radiating out from him. Now, that's going to impact your astral body. And the minute it impacts your astral body, it gets funneled to the solar plexus, which we'll talk about next time. That funnels it to the natus system underlying the physical nerves, which then pass it on to the physical nerves and the endocrine system. And now your body is releasing fight or flight chemicals and all kinds of things. And you don't even know that all of this is going on until all of a sudden your stomach feels a little queasy, or your hands feel a little sweaty,
Mhm.
or you think, gosh, I'm upset. And because nobody gets upset without a reason, you pull up some, fight you had with your spouse last week, or you slam your finger in a drawer, and now you've got a good reason to be upset. So it's okay.
That's a good one.
So a lot of what we feel during the day is the impact of those around us, which, once we understand this principle, serves to make us more responsible about what we are putting out into the environment. Humanity en masse today is understanding global pollution, that what we put into the air and water affects all of us. We have yet to address emotional and mental pollution that's radiating out from us 24 hours a day, because stifling it doesn't work. We have to change those negative emotions into positive ones as they leave our particular field, so that we do not impact others negatively.
This is going to be a big job.
Do
you know what I mean? It's enormous. Yes.
If it were easy, humanity would be a lot further along than we are. And it affects other life too. It affects plant life. We know that plants react to people's emotions. Certainly our animals, particularly our domesticated animals that live in our homes and are close to us. But even matter that we term inanimate matter absorbs these vibrations. This is why psychometry works. Somebody can pick up your keys and your car keys and tell you all about yourself, because your particular frequency has impressed itself upon the matter that you come in contact with on a regular basis. So we are affected by our greater life, and in turn we are affecting that greater life on a continuous basis. Truly, no man is an island, and we're part of that stream, that circulation of not only physical etheric circulation in life, but astral or emotional circulation and life, and mental circulation and life. So the astral body is really the body that needs the most work in terms of humanity today. This is the body that is really the groundwork of the path itself, learning to transmute negative emotions into positive ones. The age-old symbol of the emotions or the astral body is water, not only because it's in constant motion and affected easily. Think about water and how easily it's affected. Think of the work of people like Dr. Emoto, most recently, that, photographed water as it crystallizes just at the point of freezing.
There's a Emoto picture right back there of the God of Light, the Muslim. Yeah.
And for those of you that aren't familiar with Dr. Emoto's work, his book, Message from Water, is highly, highly recommended. He took water from the same source, whether it be a tap or a pond, and put the same water in two different bottles and labeled one bottle with love and appreciation and another bottle with, I hate you and you're ugly. And then after a few moments, photographed both water. And at the point of freezing, the water that received positive attention made beautiful crystals, and the water that was cursed made ugly, half-formed crystals. So water responds very, very quickly to intent. Think of how great a percentage of our bodies are water.
This reminds me, so I talked my grandson into his science project. We took rice and we did it with two others, and we had to have the right temperature, the right place and all that, and we did rice. And so we had wet rice in two different locations. And then one every day, 2-3 times a day, you tell it you hate it. The other one, you love it. And the one that they told you hated, it started molding. And it was so good. The kids actually saw it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
The science teacher didn't. Boo.
I know. It'll catch up.
Exactly.
But, again, this is where most of humanity's work needs to happen, because humanity is identified primarily with the emotions. This is called polarization, or your home base of where you live. Most of humanity still lives in the emotions. And whatever thought that's going on is at the service of the emotions. The emotions drive pretty much everything. And so in all metaphysical traditions, part of the early work is to refine the emotions, not to squelch them, because it's like putting a lid on a boiling pot. It's going to boil over sooner or later, and that's never a good thing. Mm-hmm. It works out as disease or some explosion in one's life and affairs, or, something not pleasant. But you can't, so you can't stifle the emotions, but you can refine them and change them as they leave your aura, your atmosphere. And by the way, the term aura, most people in metaphysical circles mean the radiation from the astral body, the emotions, because that's the strongest. But technically, the term aura means the totality of your radiatory field, what your physical body is putting out, what your physical etheric body is putting out, what the astral body and the mental body are all radiating as part of your aura. Again, going back to the idea of water being the symbol of the emotions, if you look at the Western traditions, for instance, in the Old Testament, the way you deal with water is you part the Red Sea, get through as quick as you can before it closes over on top of you. But of course, in the New Testament, it's calming the troubled seas, walking on top of the water. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it has to do with mastery of the emotions. And this is really what adeptship or mastery is all about, mastering our own matter. Mm-hmm. Physical matter, our astral or emotional matter, and our mental matter. So again, the astral body is really the site of most of the work of humanity. It has to do with refining our emotional nature, bringing down the toxicity, again, recognizing how we affect one another, how our emotions affect each other for good or ill, and to be responsible for that.
Mm-hmm. I remember like in one class, that's spam calling me. I forgot to turn it off. You had talked about the fish. Whenever you see the fish, they're the symbol of the astral body.
Yeah. And that was the symbol.
The birds of the mental. Yeah.
That was the symbol of the last age. Mm-hmm. And that's a really interesting thing to look at when you look at different ages and their symbols. When Moses came down from the mountain and saw them worshiping the golden calf, it was that age trying to go back to the old form in the age of Taurus. Mm-hmm. Where you had the Cretan bull and all of the Egyptian winged bull symbols and that kind of thing. Humanity always wants to put new wine into old bottles, and that never works.
Right.
So, Moses was upset because they were returning to the old form instead of embracing the archetype of that age. Mm-hmm. In the age of Aries, everybody wanted the Messiah to return, but they wanted the warrior Messiah to kick the Romans out and take over physically the throne of David. They didn't get that. They got the Piscean teacher. Mm-hmm. And so here we are again, aren't we? Everybody's expecting the return of the Christ, but, so many are expecting the robe and the sandals and the Piscean teacher rather than the form for this new age, which is Aquarius, which happens to be the form nature for all the other ages. So it could be anything.
Ah.
The form of the next avatar could be anything.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see. They're looking at it.
So the next body that we need to look at is the mental body. This is not so developed within humanity en masse as the astral body. The mental body for the bulk of humanity is at present just the lower levels of mind. We call that the concrete mind or the intellect. And this is the world of concrete thought forms. In higher forms of meditation, one is taught to reach up into the divine, but that divine is above form as we know it. And so we can only experience that divine as an abstract energy. As that energy is brought into the instrumentality, it must be then translated into meaningful information, thought forms. Mm-hmm. In my classes, I talk about 3 big categories of meditation. The first category I call meditation for communion. These are the sorts of meditation practices where you move into communion with that divine for nurturing, for support, for sanctuary. Mm-hmm. You're not trying to do anything with it. You're just trying to enter into the breath of that greater life. An example I always use is if you think of the great whales that live in the water and mate in the water and feed and hunt in the water and socially interact in the water, and yet they're creatures of the air. They have to come up to the air to breathe. Mm-hmm. So it is with meditation. We are spiritual creatures living in this dense matter. And for our health, we need to come up to breathe ever so often, whether that's prayer or meditation, mm-hmm. or whatever, that sort of communion happens to be. Right. So that's the first category of meditation, the communion with the greater life. Mm-hmm. The second category is learning through meditation. And this is not so widely practiced because, of course, it's much more difficult. And this is the kind of meditation where instead of going to the library out here, which you get a translation of a translation of a translation of ancient spiritual text, you move inward and upward into that, as the Hindus say, the rain cloud of knowable things, where you get that fresh information and bring it in and give it a form that is appropriate to this particular time and place, mm-hmm. and appropriate for you. So instead of going to the library out there, you go to the inward library and receive a fresh download. Right. So that's meditation for learning. And that means reaching up to that abstract energy and bringing it down in such a way that you translate it into meaning. That means that you've got to develop 2 different kinds of wiring in your meditation practice. The first is just learning to stand silent and receptive to be able to receive that impression. Remember, the brain is handling messages all day long. Physical messages, emotional messages, some lower mind messages. It doesn't know how to shut up and be quiet. It isn't trained to subtlety. So part of meditation work has to do with training your brain to receive the impress of something far more subtle than it's used to handling. But once you receive that abstract energy as an impression, it's got to be turned into information so that it's available and meaningful to not only yourself, but the rest of humanity. Mm-hmm. This means developing the wiring to create thought forms. Most human beings do not create thought forms. In fact, what most people think of as thoughts are really just opinions about their emotions. Thoughts are very specific things. And again, just like you've got a vast range of emotions, you've got a vast range of the frequency of thoughts. You've got, base, separative, mean, cruel thoughts, and you've got sublime thoughts of the philosopher that reaches up for that divinity, and everything in between. And just like living within the circulation of the astral network and the astral body, humanity lives within a circulation of mind. Now, it's not as developed as the astral circulation, and most of humanity's mental circulation is lower concrete mind, and a lot of it is very selfish and self-oriented, but it's still within the mental realm. And of course, those on the path are beginning to push that mental envelope up into that area of higher abstract mind where the divine can be perceived. And in fact, part of the work of the world discipleship is to be able to create that bridge from higher abstract mind, receptive to the soul, to lower concrete mind, where it becomes meaningful for the rest of humanity. So the mental plane, again, is this area of thought, and it's important because as far as the three lower worlds are concerned, what the Hindus call the three lower worlds, meaning the world of human activity, the mental realm, the astral emotional realm, the physical realm. This is being on the wheel of rebirth, living within these three frequencies, and gradually over many incarnations learning to master these three frequencies. This mental realm is the realm of cause for the three lower worlds. So whatever takes shape as a thought, whether it be a selfish thought or a sublime thought, that thought will eventually, some sooner than others, depends on the thought and the intent of the creator, that thought will cast its shadow onto the astral plane and become an astral feeling, which will then cast its shadow into the physical realm and become some experience or some physical activity. So the old phrase, thoughts are things, is really an important phrase because the mental plane is the plane of cause for the three lower worlds. So whatever we create in thought will eventually work its way out into physicality.
And there's so much on the concrete mind now with mainstream media and like.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I mean, think about this for a moment. Think about all of the science fiction novels about this future, right? We've got everything from horrific, apocalyptic, Mad Max sort of scenarios to, the Golden Age and Eden restored and the spiritual hierarchy walking with humanity outwardly once again and all of that. And again, everything in between. And all of those thoughts are already thought forms. They are things on the mental plane, and they're all swirling around. Which one's going to land? Which one are we going to allow access to physicality? And the answer to that is an old Native American story, which is the story about the little boy going to visit his grandfather. And as he approaches the teepee, he sees two wolves fighting one another. And he asks his grandfather, what is that? And the grandfather says, well, that's my higher self and my lower self. And the little boy says, which one's going to win? And the grandfather says, the one I feed.
And you know what? I think it's time, and that's a perfect ending for this, this interview, because we went through.
One more quick thing.
Okay.
One more. one more.
And then after that, I'd like you to share how people can get in contact with you.
Okay. The final layer is the etheric envelope. And this is that light body that supports the mental, supports the astral, supports the physical. This is our body from the time we became humanity as a species to mastery when we're freed from the wheel of rebirth. This is our body in or out of physical incarnation. Again, this etheric envelope is this body of light that supports the mental, supports the astral, supports the physical etheric and the physical dense. And the chakras are organs of this body, which means that the chakras have a physical counterpart, an astral counterpart, and a mental counterpart, and a spiritual counterpart. And we'll save that for next time.
And this is something most people don't consider. I mean, with all the New Age chakra writings.
Exactly.
Okay, so how can people get in contact with you? I know you're always running classes and everything, and
I teach 5 nights a week, so this is my real job. It's been my real job for 47 years now.
Wow. Wow. And it's always new and fresh and new things coming in. It's so great. So, but you have a website, right?
I do have a website. I would suggest that you access it via a tablet or a computer. It's not really set up for phone. The phone format sort of distorts it. Okay. But the website is www.lambertslodge, LAMBERTSLODGE, all one word, lambertslodge.com. So lambertslodge.com, and you can see what classes I teach, at least some of them, and my bio is there, and some of my
artwork.
My artwork, and my contact information.
Okay, so that'll be for everyone. That'll be below this, below the interview, so you'll easily be able to access that. Thank you, Georgia. This was just wonderful, and it was so like usual, put together so clearly. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure and honor. Thank you for asking me.
Okay, so bye everybody, and we'll see you next time. Well, I gotta